This is Fred Richani of TSC News here with an interview for baseball historians and fans alike. We chat with last Comiskey author Ken Smoller. He is a standout writer and photographer who covers the history of Comiskey Park, the former home of the Chicago White Sox. He also discusses his Stadium Vagabond blog, featuring his photography from attending over 2,500 events and stadiums. Can you talk a little bit about last Comiskey and how this book came about?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. Great to talk about all these things. Last Comiskey it really started with a documentary back in 2023. A first time documentarian named Matt Flesh put out a call for photos and videos on social media. And during COVID, had started the Stadium Vagabond sports travel blog and was certainly eager to make a name for myself. But more importantly, I had hundreds and hundreds of photos of old Comiskey Park that I wanted to share in the preparation of his documentary. And, given that the documentary was largely film based, maybe about 20, 30, 40 photos got included. And after the documentary came out, it got great reviews, great feedback from not just baseball fans, but just Chicago history buffs, sports history buffs. And we tried to figure out some way to make it a permanent keepsake of all the photos that couldn't make the book. I'm someone who has a bookshelf filled of stadium and ballpark photos from throughout the country, throughout the world, and I want to make sure that folks could have something they could look at to see what this great ballpark looked like that we lost 35 years ago now. And it came together pretty quickly. Ozzie Guillen agreed to provide us the forward. Ozzie Guillen, for those who don't know, was the White Sox manager during their World Series run in '05 and played for the team for 13 years. So it was a real treat to get that all together, and lucky that the book has really been well received. It was nominated for an award recently by the Chicago Writers Association for Nonfiction Book of the Year for indie nonfiction. So we're really proud with how it turned out, and really thrilled that sports fans across the country are getting into it.
Yeah, absolutely. You did a great job with the book. But I got to ask you, though, because you've been all around the world. On your website, it says over 2,300 stadiums. We talked off the air. Now that number is closer to 2,500. So
Yeah.
why did you decide to narrow it down to Comiskey specifically?
I mean, that was my first stadium that I ever went to. I went and started photographing it as a kid growing up in the Northwest suburbs back in 1982 when I brought my Kodak 110 camera for camera day. And I got hooked. I got hooked on photographing, not sports per se, although I did that during college, but the stadium experience. And, Chicago at the time had a lot of gems. They had Old Soldier Field, Old Chicago Stadium, Wrigley Field, although that was considered to be, sort of enemy territory for my family. And then when I got my driver's license, started to venture around the country and, went to Cleveland and saw the old ballpark and Detroit and New York and Boston, and just got hooked on photographing stadiums and ballparks and kind of collecting them all on a certain kind of never ending scavenger hunt. And to this day, it just built and built. And now I'm at about 2,500, kind of depending on how you count the numbers.
So how do you juggle that schedule? I mean, you're still going strong with the photography and everything. Do you just kind of go wherever you have assignment? Do you mix in like a little bit of fun as well in vacationing? How do you kind of balance all that out? So that is an insane pace throughout your life.
Well, the crazy thing is I'm not a photographer by trade. I'm a lawyer. So this is my free time that I'm doing this. And wherever I go, wherever I travel, I try to see what sporting events are going on then, what things I can go see. I take my family, I take my wife, take friends, go on my own. I always extend a trip a little bit longer if I'm able to. And, now in this day and age with Google Maps, you can easily find things in GPS. But back in the old days, before I would travel, I would, go to AAA and lay out the maps and try to find those stadiums in a given city and explore as many as I could. Not always events. Sometimes I would just sneak in. Sometimes I would go for some weird event, various other events, circuses inside arenas, all kinds of different things, just to kind of get inside of the stadium and photograph it.
Yeah, and of course, folks could check out your work on the Stadium Vagabond blog. And yeah, this a ton of great photos. I'm sure more to come as well. But specifically with the Comiskey, that was your first stadium. That was your first ballpark. For anybody that didn't have the pleasure of being there, especially when the White Sox played, What kind of made it stand out from other stadiums back then and even to this day?
Yeah, it was unique when it was built, and it certainly is unique among any stadium that I've ever seen for a few different reasons. Zachary Taylor Davis was the architect who had been known at the time for more cathedral type church architecture. And he infused the architectural design with a lot of elements that you would see in a church or in 20th century, early 20th century Chicago architecture. You had prairie style arch windows that were kind of Greco Roman in their look as well. You had kind of relief elements that looked more tantamount to what you'd see in a church than what you'd see in a ballpark. And it was one of the first steel and concrete ballparks built a little bit after Ebbets Field and Forbes Field, but contemporaries with Shy Park and 13 years before Yankee Stadium was built. Davis went on to go and design Wrigley Field as well, although Wrigley Field was not built for the Cubs. It was built for the Chicago Federal League Whales and was known as Weigman Park until the Cubs took over a few years later. But Comiskey, it had two twin decks that encircled the field. There were arches throughout the entire lower deck, all throughout, so that you could see as a fan out to the street and vice versa. You can kind of get a glimpse of the atmosphere from the street through these arches. And because of the design, you were right on top of the field. The upper deck, in particular, throughout the ballpark, enabled fans to almost be hanging over the field. It particularly, from what I understand, was great for football. A lot of people don't realize it, but the Chicago Cardinals played more games at Comiskey Park than any other stadium they played in. Soon, their stadium in Glendale, Arizona, will surpass it. But they started off as being the co-tenants of the White Sox for a number of years. And it really, when it was lost, something special was lost. It was unlike any other ballpark.
Like some of the other stadiums from that era, there wasn't a bad seat in the house.
Except for behind posts, and there were a lot of posts. So that was the one downside. If you were between the posts, you had a great unobstructed view and you were on top of the field. If you were unlucky enough to be behind one of those supporting pillars, then you were a little bit out of luck. So it was hit or miss. One of the things that it did do was because it was so compact and had such a small footprint, is it really retained its noise. You could have 5,000 people on a September night and it was just loud. And when it was full, which wasn't often, it really was a special experience.
Speaking of the White Sox, you were a witness to a number of great moments. One of those moments, of course, was them finally winning the World Series back in '05 before the Cubs did again. So what was it like to
Emphasize that.
So what was it like to be a part of that experience, which of course was led by one of the people who contributed to your book, Ozzie Guillen?
Yeah, yeah, it was really special. I took my dad to game one, and he's the one that raised me on baseball. So it was great to take him to the first World Series in the city of Chicago since 1959 for game one. And then after that, I felt like I really had to be there when they won the World Series. I couldn't find anyone else that wanted to go with me, so I grabbed myself a single ticket, flew down to Houston, and was there for that game four sweep over the Astros back when they were in the National League. And it was a surreal feeling. It was kind of a little deflating in some respects because it wasn't at the old ballpark. I always wanted to see them win at Old Comiskey and feel that noise and that energy. So it felt a little deflating in that respect, but it was just such a relief to know I'm not going to die without seeing my team win. And that was the way that a lot of White Sox and probably Cubs and Red Sox fans back in the day felt. It's just you wanted to see that one championship. And as a Chicagoan, I'm still riding high in the Bears Super Bowl 20 victory in 1985. It's been 20 years now since the White Sox won, and I'm still, feel like it was yesterday seeing Ozzie on the field celebrate with a Venezuelan flag over his shoulder with his family and, kind of waving it around, just really being proud of not just the history for Chicago, but it was the first Latin American manager to win a World Series ever. So it was really exciting on so many levels to see that and experiencing it. Uh, Contrast that to last year when there's not a lot to really kind of relish on the field. So I'm kind of selling the memory of what the good old days were like. If people want to remember what it was like when the team had a little bit more history and character, the book provides a good opportunity for people to have a sense of time travel. for those that either were there, saw it on TV, or never got a chance to see it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Ozzie Guillen, who again contributed to your awesome book. There were a number of other historians and even some ex athletes who contributed as well. Are there any that you can shout out and tell us about?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorites is Nancy Faust, the baseball organist. Nancy's famous for a lot of reasons. She played for 41 seasons for the White Sox and really changed the whole notion of the baseball experience through her music. She was the first one to have pop music in the ballpark as opposed to sort of like da 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 charge or something like that. She would take popular top 40 songs and play distinctive ones for each player, creating the notion of what a walk-up song is that is so popular today. Her first one was for Dick Allen, for whom she played Jesus Christ Superstar. Because at the time that was a big, Broadway hit and the soundtrack was big, and she felt like that's what Dick Allen was a superstar. So on top of that, Nancy also um, was the first one to introduce "Na Na 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 Hey Hey Goodbye" as a sports anthem, and brought that in 1977, which coincidentally is the shirt I'm wearing today for the South Side Hitmen. She brought that in, and it's now become, in all facets of life, politics, in sports, etc. That's now an anthem for kind of the vanquishing of your defeated. And so she brought that in. So what Nancy was really important about was not just providing music for the documentary, but everyone, players, fans, coaches, all would cite her as being a key part of the experience. And actually, my afterword in the book talks about what it was like to meet her after she had been pushed out by modern forces. I'll leave it at that, and getting to know her and having my son, who never got to experience her music, get to know her and have like a private little concert in her donkey barn in Arizona, in which we really got to experience not just what it was like at Old Comiskey Park, but just what it was like to be a White Sox fan growing up in Chicago in that era, which is something that was in many ways lost with the old ballpark.
Man, yeah, I'm so glad you shouted out Nancy. She's one of our all-time favorite guests. She actually was on an episode, and she played the organs for us. She had her donkey at the time, Mandy, in the donkey farm. Yeah, she is great. That's such an underrated. I feel like music and that kind of pageantry is such an underrated part of sports these days. People just kind of overlook it. It's just not the same. So I'm so glad that you shouted
Yeah.
her out. But you also shouted out somebody else, somebody that who she was good friends with, somebody you admired, the late great Dick Allen, who was finally, after all these years,
Yeah.
posthumously going
Yeah.
to the Baseball Hall of Fame. You were actually with the family, from what I understand, and had the honor of taking pictures of that moment. Can you just kind of describe the feeling of knowing that Dick Allen is not going to the Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
but getting to relish that with his family?
It's great. He came before my time, so all I knew about were stories. I have a photo in the book of me wearing a red White Sox hat that was in vogue in the year I was born in 1971, right when he came to the White Sox. And I'd always heard stories about the legendary home runs he hit on the roof of the old ballpark. And from what everyone had said, not only was he a great ball player, but great for his era. And the statistics kind of bear that out now that we look back with sort of a modern lens of data analytics, that he, during the era of pitcher dominance, really was a dominant offensive force, to some degree battling through the racial intolerance in Little Rock when he was in the minor leagues and then in Philadelphia. And he finally found a home in Chicago. And what I talk about in the book is that he saved the Chicago White Sox from moving to Seattle. After the Seattle Pilots moved and became the Milwaukee Brewers, Seattle was looking to build a new ballpark, which became the Kingdome, and to attract a major league team. At the time, the White Sox were drawing so poorly that they needed any spark to bring the fans in. And Dick Allen was instrumental, not just bringing the fans, but also bringing a more racially diverse group of fans into the ballpark and really making it the team for all Chicagoans, which was really important at a time of a need for racial unity in a lot of ways in the city. But being there in Dallas, the winter meetings last month, the few hours leading up to the vote were some of the longest hours I've ever experienced. I look back in my photos and see just the angst and the pain on the family's face, and then just the pure elation and relief and crying of joy and also remembrance for their lost father or uncle or grandfather. It was just such a wonderful experience. I can't wait to see him go in the summer with such an illustrious class as well, as was voted in yesterday with Ichiro and CC Sabathia and Billy Wagner. It's just going to be such a wonderful experience. And finally, he's getting his due. The only shame is he wasn't alive to see it. But his family really, really treasures this feeling, and getting to celebrate them with them that night was something I will remember forever.
LastComiskeyBook.com. That's LastComiskeyBook.com. Also, StadiumVagabond.com. We will link all that once again in the show
Yeah.
notes. Anywhere else?
Yeah, at Stadium Vagabond on social everywhere. I post usually between 3 and 5 photos a day of all of my travels. I try to rotate around the country, different sports, other countries, and just sort of share with folks who are interested to see, what are other sporting experiences like beyond their hometown.
Ken, we do appreciate the time, but before we let you go, we always like to ask our guests some random and rapid fire questions just
Love
to
it.
get to know them better. Are you ready?
Love it. Yeah.
All right. You may have already mentioned it, but what is your earliest sports memory? Could be live or on TV or on the radio.
I think my earliest one was going to the White Sox game in 1977. I know they lost to the Baltimore Orioles, and that's all I remember. But seeing that fireworks scoreboard go off booked me for life. Didn't care about wins and losses as a little kid, just cared about that scoreboard going off.
One thing that was left out of some of the memos I got before I interview you was the fact that you are actually a lawyer. So, what
Yeah,
law do you practice, and how the heck do you juggle being a lawyer, now
yeah.
being hopefully a soon to be best-selling author, a photographer, and a massive sports fan?
Yeah, it's not a lot of sleep. I'm a commercial real estate lawyer for a large retailer right now, and it's just something that I don't sleep, and I edit photos and travel as much as I can when I get time, and, I try to keep both sides of my brain and my interests going, and, now luckily I've got a family that likes to do it with me.
Great, and actually, that's the other thing I forgot to mention. My apologies. Most importantly, also a family man. So they're into this whole journey. They see the vision.
Yeah, yeah, we live in a mixed marriage because we've got, Boston and Chicago, so we've got a little bit of debating back and forth about which teams are gonna be our teams. I've definitely won on the Bears. I think my wife might have won on the Celtics. And, unfortunately, neither baseball team is doing much to gather their attention these days. On top of that, we're, big Arsenal fans, for soccer out of England, which is something they can at least watch during the day.
Besides Comiskey Park, what is your favorite stadium?
Probably my favorite stadium that I ever have gone to, besides Comiskey, is the Palestra in Philadelphia. I went to law school there, and it just drips with history. So many different basketball players have gone through there. And it is unlike any other arena that's now around. It's, the Cathedral of Basketball. It's one of my absolute favorites.
What was the worst slash ugliest stadium you've been to?
Interesting. We're gonna stick in Philadelphia. The Vet was not a great one. The Vet swallowed up Wendell Davis of the Chicago Bears when I was there in 1993. That nasty turf, the concrete donuts. Just got to pick one of the donuts, and I'll take that one. Just given the to resuscitate the memory of Wendell Davis and his shot knees.
Now, from what I understand, you of course were in Chicago. You mentioned to me off air you lived in New York City. You also, of course, are in Massachusetts. But based on what I saw on your website, you also got to actually cover a lot of the Fab Five in person.
Yeah, I went to Michigan in undergrad, and I got to cover the Fab Five for their first year, and I got to cover Desmond Howard's Heisman Trophy year, and that was in '91 and '92, those 2 years. And it, gave me an introduction to what it was like to cover big time sports. Decided it was amazing, but that I probably wouldn't be able to support a family on it, and decided to go, straight and boring and become a lawyer. But I got to cover the Final Four, from the court when I was a high school junior, the night before an econ exam. So really, got to sort of whet my appetite for going to different stadiums at that point.
I would,
And
I would imagine as somebody who had literally a front row seat, there was a whole lot of controversy stemming from that phantom timeout and everything else, right?
yeah, I was there as a fan my senior year, and I had an Eric Montrust, may he rest in peace, voodoo doll that I was holding that I got in New Orleans at the Superdome. It was to no avail. We saw that they called an unnecessary timeout early in the half, and we said they're gonna need this timeout. And sure enough, they needed that timeout. And I'm still haunted Now, I guess that would be 33 years later. I'm still haunted by that one memory.
If I'm going to Chicago, I'm looking for a hidden gem. What are you telling me to go to?
Got to go to the Wiener Circle. You got to go to the Wiener Circle. It's some of the best hot dogs, fries around, but more importantly, it is a legacy of comedic roasting all the time, both directions, all directions. It's always got a pulse. It's always got an energy. I've yet to get there during this current trip to Chicago, but every time I go there, I always make sure to say hi to the folks there.
Another topic that might be a little controversial. We mentioned Dick Allen before and how it was long overdue that this icon is now going to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Are there any Chicago White Sox players off the top of your head that you feel like have been snubbed that do belong in the Hall?
I think Mark Burley. I mean, just yesterday we found out that he's not making it, and I took a look on a lot of different ballots of various sports writers, and he's not on there. I think his statistics hold up really well with his peers. I think his innings eating was just unlike anyone else at that time. He was unhittable at points. Played on a lot of really bad White Sox teams who did not give him a lot of run support. So that's really who I think deserves to get a lot more notoriety than he did. He's this quiet, soft-spoken guy, and that went against him to some degree.
Of course, with the last Comiskey, you know, just cover all the events that you've gone to, but also the history of the actual stadium. So, in doing your research, was there any event or events that were very unique for that type of venue?
Yeah, I mean, one actually is for the folks in New York who may or may not remember it, but in the final year, on the birthday of the ballpark, July 1, 1990, Andy Hawkins pitched a no-hitter against the White Sox, yet lost 4-0. It was a windy, high sky kind of day where the sun was kind of piercing the eyes of the outfielders, and Jim Leyritz and Jesse Barfield botched 2 fly balls after a few walks, and the White Sox, who did not have a hit, won the game. It was since changed from being an official no-hitter because Fay Vincent and all of his, cohorts decided that you needed to pitch now 9 innings to be a no-hitter. But, it was a real surreal experience to celebrate the other pitcher, yet still be happy that the team won. You know, he got interviewed by Tom Seaver on the field for, I think it was The Fan at the time. Um, you can kinda see just the frustration coming out of his face from this moment that was unlike any in baseball history for, I think, about 100 years since the last time that had happened.
That is wild, and that is kind of lame. That this poor guy, there does not technically have a
I was lucky enough to be there with my camera that day, and I almost didn't make it in because I was mistakenly taken to Comiskey jail that day because it was bat day, and I didn't realize that I was too old for one of the free baths, and someone thought I was trying to swipe it, grabbed me by the arm, took me to Comiskey jail, interrogated me, and let me go just for game time, and I got to witness history right thereafter, and luckily I had my camera with me.
Hey, and you live to tell about it, so you're lucky you're good.
Yeah, I got out of Comiskey jail.
Hey, they might have your fingerprints somewhere though, but it's all right. You're good.
I made it out of law school with that nonetheless.
There you go. And as far as any other events, non-baseball events, what are some of the most unique events that you had the opportunity to cover, to photograph, and just in your research at Comiskey as well? Like, is there anything that was run there that was kind of out of the norm?
Yeah, yeah. I'll start with the first question. I've done a lot of really cool events. I've gone to see Lucha Libre in Mexico City. I've seen hurling in Dublin and sumo wrestling in Japan. But most recently, just this last Christmas period in London, I got to see one of the coolest events, seeing World Championship darts at Alexandra Palace. It's called Ali Pali in North London. Every night, 3,500 people go there. There's 2 sessions a day for 17 days. 90,000 tickets were sold out in 15 minutes. The average number of beers consumed per patron is 11. Now, my kids didn't have any, so that means people are drinking more than that. Um, on top of that, everyone dresses in costumes, silly costumes to kind of match their friends. I saw a bunch of Oompa Loompas and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I saw a bunch of women dressed as crayons. I saw A bunch of men dressed as nuns with pitchers of beer in their hand. They sing, they chant. It's just a festive atmosphere for 3 hours long. It's broadcast all over Europe on Sky Sports and other networks. It was one of the coolest events for a sport that you normally just play in a pub in the basement in the back. And it was just so much fun to see kind of British culture through a completely different lens than you would get at any other event in your time in England.
I definitely need to go to that. That sounds fun. So, did you feel left out because you didn't dress up?
No, I wasn't allowed to dress up actually in the section I was in because I got a last minute VIP ticket from someone I met who promotes it that I met in New York 9 years prior. I was very lucky, but the downside was no quote unquote fancy dress, which means costume. My son was prepared. He was ready to go with his Toy Story robot costume, but alas, we had to dress somewhat conservatively.
What is your most awkward moment as a photographer?
Difficult moment was when I went to go photograph the Barcelona soccer stadium in Camp Nou in 2002, I think it was. And this was still when it was filmed. And they were practicing for the Real Madrid match coming up that week, their big rival. And I got caught. And again, someone grabbed me by my arm, dragged me to the security office, and yanked the film. For those people who don't know, that means it's exposed and ruined out of my camera. And at the time, I was trying to get through with my high school Spanish, but they don't necessarily speak American Spanish and Catalan speaking Barcelona. And I was sort of out of luck and lost those great photos that I was really happy about. So I thought luckily got back there later on, but that was one of my brushes with law that I had over the time that was a little bit awkward.
You still get to see the game?
No, I didn't see it. I saw a match a couple days later. Not as good of photos as was available to me that first time, but I stayed out of the prisons of Barcelona. So
There's no Comiskey Park, but is there anything that is remotely close to it, at least the vibe?
yeah, yeah. One thing that's really special is in Birmingham, Rickwood Field. It debuted just 2 months after Comiskey Park, maybe only 6 weeks. Last year, it became a major league park for the first time when it hosted a Cardinals. I can't recall who they played. Game last June. It still has that feel of what an old ballpark feels like, and really is special. They don't play minor league there regularly. They have special events and colleges play there, high schools play there, but it's a living museum where you can go and walk the grounds and kind of feel the architecture. And that's one that I've got on my website, I think in my portfolio. It's one of the real special ballparks that I treasure being able to go to and love that it still exists.
What's the best piece of advice you give for success?
Just keep pursuing something that's fun. Life's short. Make sure that you're enjoying something. If it's not your main job, do something on the side that brings you joy.
I love that, and you certainly have. You're a fantastic lawyer, and of course you're doing great work with photography, and now writing the book, of course, Last Comiskey. And on another note, we'll get you on another high note. For anybody who's not already convinced, why should people check out the Last Comiskey book?
It really is a time travel back into another era. There are over 400 of my photographs. Even if you don't like the White Sox, if you're a sports fan, you will see aspects of this ballpark that you've never seen before. These photos haven't been published before, and to the best of my knowledge, no one else has done anything like this. Um, so that's what I really try to do. I try to do something new and distinctive. My next book is going to be a project about all the stadia of Chicago and the state of Illinois, and then I plan to move on to New York. Been to a number of wonderful New York events and photographed all the venues there, and Boston and Philadelphia, and that's really what I'm gonna ultimately do is do a book for each city, major city that I've been able to photograph.
Excellent. Well, fantastic work, Ken. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure chatting with you and chopping it up about some sports history and the awesome work you do. Where can fans find you online, and where can we find you
Yes.
next?
At Stadium Vagabond on all the social media, stadiumvagabond.com for my blog and photos, and if people wanted to get prints or stadium puzzles and things like that, that's available there. And then the book is lastcomiskeybook.com.